What do you mean Ethan will be CEO? I'm the one who saved this hotel. My voice echoed through the newly renovated lobby of Evergreen Peak Lodge, bouncing off the modern, mountain-inspired decor I had spent months designing and perfecting. Warm wood panels, locally sourced stone, subtle lighting, every detail screamed transformation. Every detail screamed my work. But none of it seemed to matter. My mother, Margaret, waved her hand dismissively, the gesture landing like a slap across my face. Natalie, honey, your brother has more natural leadership ability, she said gently, the same tone she'd used my entire life when explaining why I was being overlooked. You're too detail-oriented. Too detail-oriented. She said it like it was a flaw. Like it wasn't the exact reason this hotel was still standing. Before I could respond, Ethan strolled into the lobby, hands casually tucked into his pockets, wearing that familiar smug smile I'd known since childhood. The smile that said he already knew he'd won. Hey, sis, he said lightly. Don't take it personally. Someone needs to handle the day-to-day stuff, while I focus on the bigger picture. I stared at him, disbelief burning in my chest. My name is Natalie Brooks, and at 52 years old, I never imagined I'd still be fighting for recognition, especially not inside my own family's business. For over 20 years, I had built a successful career in hotel management in Chicago. I'd worked my way up from front desk supervisor to regional director for a major hotel chain. I knew operations, guest experience, staffing, branding, everything. And yet, here I was, being told I wasn't leadership material. 8 months ago, my father Thomas had called me late one night, his voice cracking with panic. The hotel was weeks away from bankruptcy. Vendors unpaid. Bookings at an all-time low. Loans piling up. I hadn't hesitated for even a second. I sold my condo in Chicago. Cashed in my savings. Walked away from a career I had spent decades building. I came home to Colorado to save Evergreen Peak Lodge. The place was a disaster when I arrived. Outdated decor that hadn't changed since the 90s. An ancient reservation system that crashed weekly. No social media presence. Online reviews that made my stomach twist. Stuck in the past. Overpriced for what you get. Not worth the stay. It broke my heart. This hotel wasn't just a business, it was my family's legacy. My grandparents had built it in 1971. I'd grown up in these hallways, helping my mother with check-ins, and watching my father handle maintenance issues. While other kids played pretend, I was learning hospitality from the ground up. Ethan, on the other hand, had never cared. 3 years younger than me, he bounced between college majors, architecture, business, something else, before dropping out entirely to find himself. My parents never seemed concerned. He's creative, they'd say. He just needs time. Meanwhile, I was the one putting in the work. When I returned home, I went straight into survival mode. I modernized the booking system. Replaced worn-out carpets using my own money. Retrained staff on basic customer service. Negotiated with suppliers. Updated furniture. Redesigned the lobby. Night after night, I stayed up hunched over spreadsheets, calculating every dollar to maximize return on investment. Slowly, it worked. Bookings doubled. Reviews improved. For the first time in years, the hotel turned a profit. And yet, standing there in the lobby, watching Ethan smirk as my parents handed him the title of CEO, I realized something painful. None of it mattered to them. The worst part? They were announcing his promotion at that night's staff meeting. The same meeting where I was supposed to present our record-breaking quarterly results. I felt eyes on me. Especially Linda, our head housekeeper, who'd been with the hotel for over 20 years. She knew. They all did. Every employee in that room knew who had truly turned this place around. But like me, they were forced to stand there and pretend this was normal. Pretend this was fair. And as I stood in the lobby I had rebuilt with my own hands, a realization settled heavily in my chest: no matter how much I gave, no matter how hard I worked, I would never be enough for them. The staff meeting that evening felt unreal, like I was watching my own life from the outside. We gathered in the renovated conference room, my renovated conference room. The new oak table still smelled faintly of Polish, and the mountain photographs lining the walls were ones I had personally selected to reflect the lodge's heritage. Every improvement carried my fingerprints, yet none of it belonged to me. My father, Thomas, cleared his throat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We have some exciting news about the future of Evergreen Peak Lodge." My stomach tightened. Beside him, Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, radiating confidence he hadn't earned. My mother, Margaret, sat next to him, smiling as though this were a celebration rather than an execution. Thomas continued, "After careful consideration, we've decided to appoint Ethan as the new Chief Executive Officer." Polite applause filled the room. Some employees clapped out of obligation, others out of confusion. A few avoided my eyes entirely. I stayed still, my hands folded in my lap, nails digging into my palms. Ethan stood. "Thanks, everyone," he said easily. "I'm excited to take Evergreen Peak Lodge into its next phase. We are going to streamline operations and think bigger than ever before. Bigger than ever before." I thought of the months I'd spent doing damage control, repairing broken boilers, calming angry guests, training exhausted staff. There was nothing glamorous about saving this hotel. It required patience, discipline, and an obsession with details. The very things my mother said made me unfit to lead. After the meeting, Linda, our head housekeeper, approached me quietly. Her lined face held sympathy and anger in equal measure. "We know who did this," she said softly. "Don't let anyone tell you different." I smiled for her sake, but my chest ached. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past 8 months over and over again. Every sacrifice. Every dollar spent. Every night I'd chosen spreadsheets over rest. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason my parents couldn't see it. The next few days shattered that illusion. Ethan began making changes immediately, big, loud changes that looked impressive on the surface and made absolutely no sense in practice. He rearranged staff schedules without consulting department heads, creating gaps during peak checkout hours. He cancelled our partnership with a local bakery to cut costs, replacing it with generic frozen pastries that guests immediately complained about. When I tried to explain why these decisions were hurting guest satisfaction, he waved me off. "Numbers aren't everything, Nat," he said with a laugh. "This is hospitality. It's about vibes." Vibes? I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The breaking point came one morning when I walked into the office to find Linda standing outside, eyes red and hands shaking. "He's firing me," she whispered. "Says I'm not flexible enough." I stormed into Ethan's office. "You can't do this," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "Linda has been here 20 years. She runs this place." Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "I'm restructuring. She doesn't fit the new model." "The new model leaves us dangerously understaffed," I shot back. "I've run the numbers." He laughed. "There you go again with numbers." I managed to intervene, saving Linda's job, but the humiliation on her face haunted me long after. That afternoon, I went to my parents armed with data. Guest reviews praising our recent improvements. Financial projections showing sustained growth. Charts. Spreadsheets. Proof. My father stared into his coffee. My mother patted my hand. Natalie, dear, you need to give your brother time to find his footing. He has such wonderful ideas. Something inside me cracked. On my drive home that evening, I passed a weathered property at the edge of town, the old Riverside Lodge, closed for over a year. A faded for sale sign stood crooked in the dirt. I pulled over. The building was rough, neglected, but I saw what others didn't. Expansive mountain views. Proximity to the ski slopes. A spa area twice the size of ours. Potential. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, thinking about every time I'd been overlooked. Every achievement minimized. Every sacrifice dismissed. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about clarity. I took out my phone and called my realtor. Can you show me the Riverside Lodge tomorrow morning? I asked. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. If they wouldn't let me lead here, I would build something of my own. The viewing of the Riverside Lodge confirmed what I already knew in my gut. It was rough, yes, peeling paint, outdated fixtures, and a lobby that smelled faintly of dust and neglect, but beneath all that was a structure with soul. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the mountains like a painting. The layout flowed naturally, as if the building itself understood hospitality better than the people running my family's hotel. This place has good bones, my realtor said cautiously. I smiled. It has a future. Within 3 weeks, the paperwork was signed. I didn't tell my parents right away. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed this decision to exist without their influence. For once, I wanted something that wasn't filtered through their expectations or measured against Ethan's potential. I resigned officially from Evergreen Peak Lodge the following Monday. Margaret stared at me across the kitchen table. You're being emotional. No, I replied calmly. I'm being intentional. Thomas looked stunned. After everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. Everything I'd done for them, the money, the hours, the expertise, was apparently invisible the moment I stopped being useful. Ethan didn't even pretend to be upset. Guess you couldn't handle not being in charge, he said with a shrug. I didn't respond. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided not to listen. Renovating the Riverside Lodge became my entire world. I named it the North Crest, a symbol of ascent, of reaching the peak through effort rather than entitlement. While Ethan hosted loud parties at Evergreen Peak Lodge, I spent my nights with contractors, architects, and design boards spread across folding tables. Every decision was deliberate. I focused on sustainability, energy-efficient systems, locally sourced materials, partnerships with regional artisans. Where Evergreen Peak had tried to mimic luxury, Northcrest would earn it. Word spread quickly. Some people called me reckless for competing with my own family. Others, especially former Evergreen Peak employees, quietly reached out. I heard you're building something new, Linda said during a hushed phone call. If you ever need someone who knows how to run a team. I already know, I said. When can you start? One by one, the best people followed, not because I asked, but because they trusted me. Meanwhile, Evergreen Peak Lodge began to unravel. Guest reviews slipped. Complaints piled up about inconsistent service, broken amenities, and indifferent management. 3 longtime staff members quit within the first month of Ethan's leadership. I heard through the grapevine that they'd slashed room rates just to maintain occupancy. I felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. Northcrest's opening night arrived 6 months after that staff meeting. The lobby buzzed with energy. Warm lighting reflected off reclaimed wood beams. Guests sipped wine from local vineyards while live acoustic music filled the space. Then my parents walked in. Margaret's smile froze. Thomas scanned the room in disbelief. Ethan followed behind them, his jaw tight, eyes dark. "This is excessive," Ethan muttered. "You're trying to destroy us." I met his gaze steadily. "No. I'm succeeding despite you." The local paper covered the opening, calling Northcrest a bold reimagining of mountain hospitality. Reservations flooded in within days. Evergreen Peak Lodge, meanwhile, couldn't escape its reputation. Success didn't shield me from backlash. Old family friends stopped calling. Vendors hesitated, pressured by my mother's social circle. I was quietly removed from the local tourism board due to a conflict of interest. I adapted. I found better vendors in Denver. Built direct relationships with ski tour operators. Doubled down on guest experience instead of politics. Every obstacle sharpened me. Then came the visit I'd been dreading. Margaret and Thomas appeared in my office one morning, faces drawn and tense. "The bank is threatening to call the loans," Margaret said. "Ethan is overwhelmed." They wanted me to help, not as CEO, of course, but to guide Ethan. I leaned back in my chair, strangely calm. "I offered help 8 months ago," I said. "You chose Ethan. Now you have to live with that choice." Thomas tried invoking legacy. "Your grandfather built that place." "And I tried to save it," I replied. "You handed it to someone who treats it like a playground." They left disappointed. I felt free. The whispers around town intensified: ungrateful daughter, bitter sister. Some days it hurt. But every morning I walked into Northcrest's lobby and watched guests marvel at the space, watched my team move with confidence and pride, and I knew I'd made the right decision. Northcrest wasn't revenge. It was proof. The first real test of Northcrest's success came in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't the sold-out weekends or the glowing online reviews, those I'd prepared for. What I hadn't anticipated was how deeply success would unsettle the town. In a place where family names mattered and history carried weight, stepping outside the unspoken hierarchy made people uncomfortable. Especially when it worked. Guests began choosing Northcrest over Evergreen Peak Lodge without hesitation. Travel bloggers praised our attention to detail, our sustainability practices, and, most often, our service. The staff treated guests like individuals, not room numbers, and people noticed. Evergreen Peak's reviews, by contrast, grew increasingly bitter. Inconsistent housekeeping. Front desk seemed untrained. Not worth the price. I tried not to read them. But small towns have a way of delivering information whether you ask for it or not. Old friends of my parents stopped meeting me for coffee. Invitations quietly disappeared. Even casual greetings became strained, polite, distant. For a while, I wondered if I was paying too high a price for independence. That doubt faded the night Northcrest hosted its first major community event, a charity fundraiser for the local animal shelter. We opened our event hall to the public, donated the space, and matched every contribution made that night. The turnout exceeded expectations. I watched guests mingle with staff, laughing, donating generously, and praising the space. For the first time since leaving Evergreen Peak, I felt connected to the town again, not through obligation, but through shared purpose. "This is why I love hospitality," Linda said beside me, watching the room. "You bring people together." Her words stayed with me. Professionally, Northcrest was hitting milestones faster than projected. Occupancy rates were among the highest in the region, and boutique hotel owners from nearby towns began reaching out for advice. I declined most consulting offers, choosing instead to focus on building something sustainable rather than expanding too quickly. Evergreen Peak Lodge, meanwhile, continued to decline. Ethan stopped attending industry events, dismissing them as popularity contests. Longtime vendors quietly distanced themselves. Maintenance issues went unresolved. And still, my parents defended him. The breaking point arrived with the Colorado Luxury Hospitality Awards. Northcrest received 2 nominations, Best New Boutique Hotel and Excellence in Guest Experience. Evergreen Peak Lodge received none. The awards ceremony was held in Denver, a black-tie event filled with hotel owners, journalists, and industry leaders. My team attended together, nervous but proud. As we took our seats, I noticed my parents in the back of the ballroom. They hadn't told me they were coming. Margaret's posture was rigid. Thomas looked older somehow, smaller beneath his suit jacket. Ethan wasn't there. When the announcer read the nominees for Best New Boutique Hotel and called Northcrest's name, the room erupted in applause. My team cheered. Linda grabbed my hand. As I walked toward the stage, I caught my parents' expressions, shock, pride, regret, all tangled together. I kept my acceptance speech simple. I thanked my team, our guests, the community. I even mentioned Evergreen Peak Lodge as the place where I first fell in love with hospitality. The room shifted uncomfortably. They understood the subtext. Afterward, a travel magazine editor approached me. "We'd love to feature Northcrest," she said. "Your story is compelling." My parents lingered nearby, listening as I explained how being passed over for leadership had pushed me to build something of my own. "Sometimes," I said evenly, "the best success comes from being underestimated." The article ran 2 weeks later. It named Northcrest Best Boutique Hotel in the Rockies. It also included a feature on traditional family-run hotels struggling to adapt, with Evergreen Peak Lodge as the unnamed but unmistakable example. The town changed overnight. People who once whispered about me being spiteful now congratulated me openly. Former critics reframed their opinions as support they'd always had. I accepted it without bitterness. My parents, however, grew quieter. They didn't call. Didn't text. And for the first time, that silence didn't hurt. Success had given me something I never expected, freedom from needing their approval. 3 weeks after the Colorado Luxury Hospitality Awards, my parents finally reached out. The message was short and carefully worded. "Dinner? Just the 3 of us." I stared at my phone for a long time before replying. I wasn't expecting an apology. I'd learned better than that. But something in me wanted closure, or at least clarity. Their house felt smaller than I remembered. The furniture hadn't changed, but the energy had. My mother greeted me with a tight smile, my father with an awkward nod. Over dinner, they stuck to small talk. The weather. The unusual snowpack. A mention of Northcrest's latest 5-star review that sounded more like a news headline than pride. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "We want you to know," he said slowly, "that we are proud of what you've accomplished." Margaret nodded quickly. "We may not have shown it well, but we see now how much work you've put in." Their words landed flat. I'd spent years imagining this moment, wondering how it would feel to finally be acknowledged. Now that it was here, it felt strangely hollow, like praise delivered too late to matter. I waited. Sure enough, Margaret leaned forward. "Ethan's struggling," she said softly. "The hotel isn't doing well. He's in over his head." There it was. They wanted something. "We were wondering," she continued, "if you might guide him. Just help us get things back on track." I took a breath, steady and deliberate. "I offered to help a year ago," I said. "I gave up my life in Chicago to save Evergreen Peak Lodge. You chose Ethan." Thomas frowned. "That doesn't mean you have to abandon us." "I didn't abandon you," I replied calmly. "You dismissed me." Silence filled the room. "I'll give advice if you want it," I continued. "I can recommend consultants, suppliers, training programs. But I'm not coming back." I'm not fixing what Ethan broke. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, neither of them pushed back. Driving home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. Setting boundaries hurt, but it healed, too. That shift carried into other parts of my life. I stopped over-explaining my decisions. I let go of relationships that thrived on guilt and obligation. I invested more deeply in the people who supported me without conditions. At Northcrest, we continued to grow, carefully, intentionally. Occupancy rates reached record highs. Industry inquiries came in weekly. Evergreen Peak Lodge hired an external consultant. Ethan, kept his distance. And I was okay with that. One morning, standing in Northcrest's lobby, I watched sunlight pour through the tall windows, casting warmth across the reclaimed wood floors. Guests laughed as they planned their day. Staff moved with confidence, pride evident in every interaction. This was what I'd always wanted Evergreen Peak to be. But more importantly, this was something I'd built without permission. Later that month, Northcrest hosted another community event, this time a fundraiser for wildfire relief. The turnout was overwhelming. People donated generously, volunteers worked late into the night, and the space buzzed with shared purpose. I realized then that my role in the community had changed. I wasn't my parents' daughter. I wasn't Ethan's sister. I was a leader in my own right. That realization brought peace. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the mountains in thick snow, and turning Northcrest into a quiet kind of magic. The fireplaces crackled from morning to night. Guests lingered in the lounge long after dinner, sharing stories over mugs of hot cider. Every booking felt intentional, every interaction grounded in warmth rather than spectacle. For the first time since I'd entered the hospitality world, I wasn't running on adrenaline alone. I was running on purpose. With stability came reflection, and reflection brought difficult questions. What did reconciliation look like when trust had been broken? I didn't know the answer, but life seemed determined to test me. In late January, Thomas called. His voice sounded different. Tired. Stripped of authority. Your mother collapsed this morning, he said quietly. It was exhaustion. The doctors say she needs rest. I drove to the hospital without thinking. Margaret lay pale beneath white sheets, pride momentarily erased. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. I didn't know how heavy it was, she whispered. Carrying everything. Controlling everything. I sat beside her bed, unsure what role I was supposed to play. She squeezed my hand. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'd outshine us. Afraid of losing control of the family name. The honesty stunned me. I never wanted to take anything from you, I said softly. I just wanted to build something meaningful. Thomas stood near the window, staring out at the snow. We made mistakes, he said. Big ones. That afternoon didn't erase the past, but it softened its edges. Evergreen Peak Lodge closed temporarily that winter, for renovations, though everyone in town knew it was financial necessity. Ethan stepped away from day-to-day operations, citing burnout. I didn't gloat. Instead, I focused on Northcrest's winter retreat program, wellness weekends centered on rest, mindfulness, and reconnect Ion. They sold out weeks in advance. The irony wasn't lost on me. In February, I received an unexpected email from Ethan. I don't know how to run what Dad gave me. I never did. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our properties. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the bravado that had always protected him. I thought leadership meant authority, he said. I didn't understand responsibility. I listened. Not to rescue him, but to understand him. I don't need your hotel, he said finally. I need to figure out who I am without it. I respected that. For the first time, we spoke as equals, not rivals shaped by our parents' expectations. Spring brought renewal. Evergreen Peak Lodge sold to a regional hospitality group that specialized in historic restorations. The deal preserved the building and paid off the family's debts. My parents downsized. Simpler life. Fewer appearances to maintain. They attended Northcrest's spring gala as guests, not owners, not patrons, just people. Margaret hugged me tightly that night. "You built something beautiful," she said. I believed her. By the time summer returned to the mountains, everything felt different, lighter, quieter, more honest. Northcrest no longer felt like something I had to defend. It stood firmly on its own, woven into the rhythm of the town. Guests returned year after year, not because of glossy marketing, but because the place made them feel seen. That had always been my goal. I spent more time mentoring young managers now, sharing the lessons I'd learned the hard way. I told them the truth no one had told me early on: leadership wasn't about being chosen, it was about choosing yourself, even when no one else did. The town had changed, too. People spoke openly about the fall of Evergreen Peak Lodge, not as gossip, but as a lesson. Tradition alone wasn't enough. Legacy had to be earned every day. The building reopened under its new owners with respect and restraint. It no longer tried to compete with Northcrest. Instead, it found its place as a historic landmark, a reminder of what had been, not what could have been. And I was at peace with that. Ethan moved to Seattle. He found work outside hospitality, something creative, something his own. We spoke occasionally, carefully at first, then more naturally. The rivalry that had defined us for years slowly faded into something softer. Siblinghood. My parents settled into a quieter life, stripped of social performances and rigid expectations. Thomas took up woodworking. Margaret joined a local book club and volunteered at the animal shelter Northcrest had once supported. Sometimes, growth came through loss. One evening, after a long day, I walked alone through Northcrest's garden path. The air smelled of pine and wildflowers. Strings of soft lights glowed above the courtyard, and laughter drifted from the lounge. I thought back to the staff meeting, the oak table, the applause meant for someone else, the way my future had seemed to disappear in that moment. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I wouldn't tell her to be patient. I'd tell her to be brave. Northcrest expanded slowly over the next year. A second wing, a culinary residency program, partnerships with local artists. Growth never came at the expense of values. That was my non-negotiable. I was invited to speak at industry conferences, to judge hospitality awards, to consult for family-run hotels navigating generational transitions. I always accepted one condition: I wouldn't be presented as a cautionary tale. I was a case study in choice. One autumn afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from a young woman working at a resort in Utah. They promoted my brother over me, even though I trained him. I was angry until I heard your story. I'm starting my own place next spring. I pinned the letter to my office wall. That was legacy. Not buildings. Not names. Impact. On Northcrest's 5th anniversary, the team surprised me with a small ceremony. Linda gave a speech, short, heartfelt, honest. "You didn't just build a hotel," she said. "You built a culture." As applause filled the room, I felt something settle inside me, a sense of completion I hadn't known I was missing. This story was never about betrayal. It was about becoming. And I wouldn't change a single step that brought me here.